Hey everyone. Sorry for the absence. I've been sick, and this episode that we recorded almost fell apart. Chris's phone was messed up, and so young Neocon and I just sort of started doing the episode because we didn't know if Chris was going to show up. So I'm recording this intro because we didn't actually do an intro because we just started talking about everything. So today's episode is about Superfreakonomics. And it's got young Neocon and me and Chris. And I hope you like it. Enjoy. So, this chapter, he talks about how women used to be prostitutes in, well, he says prostitutes. I guess we should say sex workers now. So he talks about how a lot more women used to be sex workers because it was legal for them to do that. And they used to make a lot more money, and he kind of puts it in like a sort of proto-fascist narrative where he's talking about men wanting more sex than they can get for free, and like there's like supply and demand with sex.
Yeah,
like sex is a literal marketplace, and yeah, I do not like this stuff.
Well, okay. But even before he gets to this, let's just look at all the bullshit of this stuff. Like, he says, where was it? Yeah, women who went to Harvard earn less than half as much as the average Harvard man. And then he says, even when they controlled for other stuff, accounted for full-time full employees, major professional, they found it still earned 30% less. And then he says, what can I possibly account for this? There are a variety of factors. Women are more likely to leave the workforce or downshift their careers to make a family. Even within high-paying occupations like medicine and law, women tend to choose specialties that pay less. First of all, two things. He literally just says in the analysis before that they're controlled for exactly that phenomenon, first of all.
Right.
But secondly, he says choose to specialties that pay less, right? And even in
the jobs just naturally pay less, and they happen to be the ones that choose that.
but it's interesting because even in the neoclassical economics literature on gender discrimination, where they do in fact try to explain away a lot of it. But by the way, what they use as the metric of discrimination is what they call the unexplained wage gap. Which,
right?
I mean, if you add an infinite number of variables, there will be nothing unexplained. So it's kind of annoying. But the
joke I always make is if you control for all of the things that cause the wage gap, there's actually no wage gap.
Exactly. Right. And then, but even in those papers where they do that, they say you can't impute, even if it is, in these papers, they make it very clear to say, even if this were a free choice in the substantive sense that we usually mean the word, that still doesn't prove as non-discrimination because preferences are endogenous. So if you live in a sexist culture and you internalize the norms that you're supposed to go to these professions, then in fact, even though it looks like free choice, and there's no explicit compulsion, it's still a result of the discrimination. They even admit that in the fucking neoclassical. Even the right wingers would admit that. Not all of them, but in the mainstream journals, they say that. So it's just like it's just like it's absurd. Also, yeah, on the second page, he has this line. This is an incredibly disgusting line in a book. I can't even believe it, but it's like from a 1950s. It's like from Mad Men. It says, plotting the absences against employee productivity ratings, the economists determined that this menstrual absenteeism accounted for 14% of the difference in earnings at the bank. Like that phrase, menstrual absenteeism. Whew.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
And what's amazing too is that they're talking about productivity at a bank, but they don't specify what sections of the bank, and it's not like you can how do you measure productivity except in earnings? I don't know.
Yeah, you could just talk about like how fast they draw the paper money, per person.
Exactly.
Right? Like how many paper monies they make.
or like if they're a teller, how many customers they serve per hour? Like what's the productivity?
I think productivity in business usually means like dollars out per dollars in. So like if you invest $1 million in the bank and you get $1 billion out, it's like $1,000 per dollar or whatever.
But that's what they're trying to explain, right? Because they're trying,
of course.
so it's so they clearly they can't use that metric, or else you know what I'm saying,
Right.
so they had to have
that's
chosen some other
how all of
metric.
economics basically works. Is like they try to explain things that happen in dollars by trying to transform a measure in dollars to something else that it isn't necessarily, and saying that it's like this thing that relates to like physical phenomenon.
Yeah. Okay, Nitson and Bickler. No, I like them. Shout out to them. But
there's one really crazy line in this chapter to me, which is if, for instance, men convicted of hiring a prostitute were sentenced to castration, the market would contract in a hurry. That's like what 12-year-olds think. That's like when you're in middle school, you're like, man, if they just cut guys' balls off, they would stop committing crimes like that.
Oh yeah.
And also, what's funny about it is that it's just like it's just like false, because what if only 1% of people who did it were caught, then I bet you a fair number would still just be, and then you still have to go through a trial or whatever. A fair number would be like
yeah, I mean, he even talks through this whole chapter about how little prostitution is like prosecuted because like the cops like let it happen, you know?
Or what they used to do up until it was made illegal only in the last 10 years was just sleep with the prostitute and then arrest them.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you that literally just became illegal in Michigan, I think, until like a couple years ago.
Jesus.
But it's suffice it to say, these are not whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we talked about crime a lot. So, I mean, I don't know how much more there is to mine out of this chapter.
If you think about it, actually everything is a crime. So, we
should start that ideology, like instead of like the voluntarist who thinks everything is a market, like everything is a crime.
Yeah. Well, no, but you see,
if you think about it, eating is a crime. You know,
yeah, right.
You're literally murdering something that's alive.
Mm-hmm.
Fellas, is it gay to eat?
Yeah, you're literally putting it in your mouth, and it was prepared by another man's hands. So I mean, it's basically just...
Wow, you're putting spinach in your mouth just like a dick.
Right. Notoriously dick-like food, spinach.
Yeah.
Spinach and artichoke.
Yeah.
Artichoke is the most because you split it open. That's how you know. But never mind.
Yeah.
Artichoke. What are you artichoking on, dick?
Ooh.
Oh fuck! Artichoke me, daddy.
So the next chapter is suicide bombers should buy life insurance or whatever. It's part of the subtitle of the book.
Hell.
Yeah, really great stuff. So he talks about terrorism and how it's usually middle class, educated people.
Yeah.
Which apparently is a similar profile to revolutionaries as well.
Well, wait, do you know what citation he gives?
No, I didn't write that down.
If it's who I think it is, which is the Chicago suicide bombing project, which would probably who it would probably be, then he is about to say something, as he is wont to do, that is in direct contradiction to the person he is citing. But anyway, I have to check. But anyway, let me see.
Let's see. He brings up the high cost of security theater with like no political analysis to it. It's just like, yeah, you know, it's like a technical argument. It's like, you know, it costs so much and does so little, and you know, well, it's just a bad idea, I guess. Not because like it's like a racist institution or anything like that, or like it's a you know method of controlling people or anything like that. It's just like, yeah, it doesn't get results, which is why it's bad.
Right. Results.
Yeah, he kind of goes all over the place in this chapter because he then goes to talking about emergency rooms
and how the ER didn't really exist prior to the 80s, and now the ER makes up 56% of medical traffic, and has barely any surge capacity. But there's like no discussion of how privatization affects this problem.
But
like the fact that people can't get health care through the normal means, and so they have to go to the emergency room.
Right.
He doesn't talk about that at all.
But wait, before he even says this, right, he says, terrorists tend to be drawn from well-educated middle-class or high-income families, despite a few exceptions, the Irish Republican Army and perhaps the Tamil Tigers. Now, first of all, because the person I thought he was going to cite is Robert Pape, who wrote the book Dying to Win. And he also does point out the middle-class educated thing. But he also points out that suicide bombers are vastly more likely to be women than other types of like soldier, basically. And other types of suicide. So yeah. And Tamil Tigers are the ones who invented the suicide bombing tactics. So saying we could hand wave them away is very funny, because both the IRA and the Tamil Tigers were secular. And when Pape wrote the book, it's not true anymore because the Iraq War has gone on so long. But when Pape wrote the book and suicide bombing as a tactic was more widely, evenly distributed, the research found that actually religious people were less likely to do it. And actually more of the suicide bombers, including in the Middle East, tended to be secular and Marxists. But then, whatever. But anyway, the explanation here is just like, I don't know. Also, this thing about, let's see, terrorist profile seems like quite a bit of a typical revolutionary. In some of these cases, a lot of these people are middle class. Most of them are professional class. I mean, they're people like doctors, lawyers, engineers, military officers, teachers. Those are the big ones. But that's just this annoying conflation of middle class with like middle income, whatever. And then let's see. Yeah, I don't know. It's such a flagrant weirdness with this stuff. It's just like the biggest predictor of suicide bombing, first of all, is occupation, right? Suicide bombings have only ever been used in the context of occupation against an asymmetric power. That's the first result Pape finds, and that holds up even after the years. The second is they primarily are directed against democracies, because an authoritarian government would respond to a suicide bomb by saying, "Who gives a shit? You just killed our own civilian. We don't care." Whereas in a democracy, it can drive people to vote them out. You know what I mean? So that's what happened. That's what happened in Spain, for example. The other point is that the religion matters in as much as if the religion of the occupier and occupied are different. But like, let's say both sides are Christian, then there's no effect of the religion. And the other thing that I found, that the reason the middle class people were all into this, were the ones more likely to do this, is they had higher ranks of higher degrees of like social ties, participation in social organizations, were more likely to be like political activists in the first place, which is a consistent result, or at least in like the leadership core of it. And like any army, middle class people tend to go up to sort of the opposite level, right? So, or the equivalent of it. So the reason that the high middle class people do it is because they believe in the cause, they have high social ties, and they think they're serving like their people. So yeah. Anyway, my point is that there's a very powerful social explanation for this, namely the degree of social ties and social status and the loss thereof, asymmetries of power, a lot of all these other kinds of things that predict suicide attacks. Anyway, they sort of actually kind of they work against the thought process here, because there are incentives, but the incentives are not the ones that they're thinking about.
That is all like way more interesting than what he talks about in the book.
Well, the book Dying to Win is a fucking good book.
Oh yeah,
I highly recommend it. It's not. I think some of it has been shown to be wrong in the long run, but most of it's true.
Nice.
Yeah, but Yeah, I don't know. It's really funny. Yeah, it's just, yeah. If he shows like in these countries, like if the occupation stops, so do the suicide bombing. Like so, it doesn't. There's no other thing.
And speaking of like not really bringing up occupation, he brings up the statistic that as many people die in traffic accidents each year as troops have died since 1982, and he says that like no more U.S. troops have died during wartime than during peacetime. Like during peacetime, they die in like training accidents
And in suicide.
Yeah, but it's like, okay, that's not true for like every war. So the reason that it's happening for the current wars is they're like very safe because there's such a high power asymmetry.
Well, it's true since probably since Vietnam.
Right.
But even before then, it's something like, well, because the bulk when in these total wars like World War I and World War II, I mean, it's like everybody else is getting killed too, so it's just like, there's, I don't know, but also another thing is that like who is counted as a troop and who is counted as a civilian is always like fraught because they depend on ideological considerations, right? So anyway,
so I mentioned the traffic thing. We'll come back to that in a minute. Let's see. He concludes the chapter by fawningly talking about how like a British science nerd used banking algorithms to do mass surveillance to stop terrorism.
yeah.
Yeah.
As though, by the way, the banks aren't already doing that. Like,
Yeah.
like what book? What was it? I forget which one I read, but which of the many books I've read on this subject. But it was talking about how, what is it like 4 of the leading CEOs of these big banks had been caught knowingly laundering money for both drug cartels and terrorist organizations, and Obama's administration refused to prosecute because it would be quote unquote too destabilizing to the economy. But then they just fired the CEO the next week anyway, so clearly it wouldn't have been. And then so it's just, I don't know, it's absurd.
And it's kind of like, I don't know, that's like half the point of a bank is to like
Spy.
Yeah, to spy and to control the distribution of political power, you know?
And insurance companies and
right.
State bureaucracies, census bureaucracies. I mean, all of what their trade is the information they gather and mobilize, and also that they have money. But
right. So I don't understand like why the next chapter is in here at all. So he starts talking about Kitty Genovese, which makes me think that in a darker timeline he would be Rorschach, not like as in like a tough cool guy, but like as in a smelly fascist that eats cold beans and like beats the shit out of people for doing crimes. Levitt's Journal, October 12th, 1985. Tonight, an economist died in New York.
I'd watch that movie. I'd watch the shit out of that movie.
Well, wait. In the original one, whatchamacallit, isn't it Alan Moore who wrote Watchmen, right?
Yes.
And he's a fucking anarchist. Like,
Alan Moore is, yeah, not Rorschach.
No, but Rorschach was supposed to be like his vision was making fun of Steve Ditko, who was an objectivist. So he was trying.
Right.
He was trying to show how libertarianism leads to fascism. That's literally what he was intending to show with the character. If I'm thinking, it's Alan Moore, right? Or am I going to be owned on this? Yeah, okay.
It's Alan Moore. It's funny. I was like looking for videos before we started recording to like remember what his voice sounds like, so I could do that joke. And I made the mistake of looking at the comments for the video because everyone was talking about how Rorschach is like really cool and heroic and good and has good morals and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yes, that was the point of that character.
All right, listen to that. Okay, but not to go back to crime, but this fucking thing about altruism is it's so absurd. This is an incredibly sinister set of pages. Perhaps you could randomly select a group of states and command each of them to release 10,000 prisoners. You could select a different group of states, lock up 10,000 people. Wait a few years and measure these crimes. Then you have a randomized experiment. It says, happily, the American Civil Liberties Union was good enough to create just such an experiment. In recent decades, the ACLU has filed lawsuits against dozens of states to protest overcrowded prisons. Key line here, granted, the choice of states is hardly random because more punitive states lock up more people and therefore already have higher rates of crime. Also on top of their whatever. Anyway, it says the ACLU sues where prisoner whatever. The ACLU wins virtually all of these cases. False. Just false. I mean, that's just, to even write that is false. I worked at a fucking prisoner's firm and I've worked at the ACLU. This is not, I mean, interned. Okay, I'm not going to talk too big about myself. But all right. But fuck it. That's such, okay. Then he says, the prison population falls by 15%. What do those freed prisons do? A whole lot of crime. In the 3 years after the ACLU wins a case, violent crime rises by 10% and property by crime by 5% of the affected states. Now, what? First of all, he's already admitted it's not random. Secondly, the dates of this is not given, and nor are the context of this. Look, and he says, the ratio of arrests per crime fell dramatically during the 1960s for both property and violent crime. But courts were also less likely to lock up people. A criminal could expect to spend an astonishing 60% less time behind bars than they would have for the same crime committed a decade earlier. First of all, the big reason driving that was civil rights movement, because before, cops would just literally just pick up any person of color they saw and then put them in jail for the offense. And clearance rates fell. People are like, clearance rates fell from 90% from murder to 50%. And then you look at it and it's like, because they couldn't frame people anymore. Like literally, that's true. And then it says between 60 and 80. Yeah, he talks about the rise in youth, and therefore surge of crime.
So I guess it's not because of legalized abortion anymore.
No, it's on top of it. No, that's what saved it later. But then he says, but even such a radical demographic shift can only account for 10% of the increase in crime. As we talked about, this crime change happened in every single post World War II industrial country, and all of them had the same population increase. So what he's doing is he's selectively sampling the wrong kind of data and not using the right comparisons. It's an incredibly sly form of p hacking or whatever. Basically, it's not that, but it's a purposeful omission.
And he says it's like because we weren't imprisoning enough people and because of TV or something.
He says a host of other things, including the great migration of African Americans from the rural South to northern cities, and the return of Vietnam vets by the war. First of all, I really wish I had the citation for this ACLU thing because I know it's horseshit. I mean, I know it's horseshit because I actually the last time I sent you these articles where they talk about testing Levitt's hypotheses and reviewing them. And literally, even these other kind of conservative economists are saying, no, he's totally wrong on all of this crime stuff. It's just like I showed you the deterrence paper where they literally they test all these hypotheses, and they found that literally only one form of policing had any effect, and the rest didn't. It was just like, so he has the TV variable thing. Talking about property crime. They compare the children. Because let's see. Oh, here we go. For every extra year a young person was exposed to TV in his first 15 years, we see a 14% increase in the number of property crime arrests.
I mean, that's probably because they were at home without parents there because the parents were working or something,
But also, as Robert Putnam in the book Bowling Alone shows, television, among other forms of mass media and cultural changes, is both correlated, but also he argues at least somewhat causally responsible for the decline in social ties, social capital, and participation in organizations on average over time for the average person. Those three variables predict fucking like male suicide and male murder rates, men's murder rates. Like that's really it. Like and so at the same time as this is happening, you have this massive boom in youth. You have the rise of the highway system. You have the rise of the suburbs. You have white flight, and you have the decline of social ties and social capital, all co-occurring at the same time. There's a bunch of other things too, as well as sort of social unrest because of basically civil rights movement showing everything to be sort of making it plain to everybody's faces. You know what I mean? Because everybody already was aware. But of like whatever. So you have this, and faith in the justice of the law is also a predictor of crime. So he avoids all these other things like economic dislocation. He just jumps over the migration thing. He jumps over the discrimination thing. He jumps over the belief in legitimacy of the law. He jumps over the issues of the social ties and social capital. He jumps over changes in industrial structure and in the car system and all this other stuff. Like the introduction of highways is correlated with the rise of serial killings in like basically every place that it occurred. There's a book. Let me find it.
This book is less educational about crime than the TV show that I'm watching right now, Mindhunters. It opens up like talking about how like state violence and like deprivation causes people to become like criminals.
Is that the Netflix one or the Ted Kaczynski one?
It's the Netflix one about
the BTK.
Yeah. It's about like the FBI unit that created like the idea of serial killers and stuff.
Yeah, I watched the first season of that.
What's your take?
I haven't watched the second yet. I tried to, but I just couldn't.
You couldn't. It is incredibly entertaining, but it is not.
Oh yeah, here we go. Here's the book. It's called "Killer on the Road: Violence in the American Interstate," and it's true. It's like in
I remember you posting something about this.
It's really interesting because in like Mexico and Russia and too. And by the way, obviously we all know the introduction of highways is correlated with a ton of other variables that are also criminogenic. So no one is solely attributing it to that, but it does actually have a causal effect because, for example. One of the main places
weren't highways like used to divide black neighborhoods in like the post civil rights era.
What had happened with that was that it was sort of to the effect of like there were power struggles of where the highway should go, and then the black community organizations would always lose or have no voice whatsoever. So it was easiest for them to that there was in Robert Moses. It says the author of the book Power Broker says Robert Moses did it on purpose. But a later study by, I forget who it was, shows that it wasn't the case. But it definitely was true that his policies were racist and his road building was racist. But like with the truck stop thing, though, it's like one of the main things you start to see are murders and abduction of people, and especially sex workers, at truck stops. Because if you're a serial killer, you're just driving from out of town, you kill someone, horribly, you then just leave, and you're never going to get caught because it's a group of people society has decided are expendable in the first place, and then you're mobile. They have no idea where you're coming from or where you're going. They didn't have synthesized databases of DNA or whatever. So in Mexico and in Russia, whatever, these mass highways are in fact both because of their correlation things and because of their causal effects associated with these rises. Anyway, yeah.
So, is there like no such thing as serial killers in countries where they don't have like highway systems like that?
No. This is just referring to a very kind of like specific there's serial murders pretty much in probably every urbanized society.
Okay.
But otherwise, if you're like in a small like rural town in the middle of nowhere, I mean, if you wanted to become a killer, you just like join the army or whatever. I mean, but serial murder requires, because you have to have many victims, right? So you have to be able to not get caught. You have to have a large supply of victims. You have to be able to move around quickly, and so that requires urbanization. But
true, yeah.
This specific kind of like I don't know how to explain it. It's like, as I said, it was correlated with all these other rises too, but it just enabled things to happen in a certain way.
So the next chapter is the fix is in, and it's cheap and simple, and he is talking, of course, about communism, which is the fix, and it's cheap and simple.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. So he starts talking about Ignaz Semmelweis discovering that doctors washing their hands reduces child mortality.
Sorry. One last thing I want to just say about from the crime chapter.
Oh, sure.
Is he brings up the Milgram experiment and the Zimbardo experiments, and and how they got basically people to do whatever they wanted. Those two studies, I mean, and by the way, they have been replicated under a lot of conditions to the best of our ability. I can put a link to Zimbardo's little popular press book on it, but this undercuts so much of what he's saying here, because the central thrust of these these studies is that basically there isn't a conscious incentive thing here operating in terms of whatever. It is the perceived legitimacy of the authority and whatever. And that basically the point is that situational influences and outside of our consciousness determine vastly more of our behavior than anything approximating conscious will, and they do so in ways that do not follow the per se abstract incentive structure that he's talking about, but instead they have frame dependent incentive structure. So it's like you can induce people to either care about money or care about power or whatever, but it's beyond the control of the people themselves. So it undercuts the sort of rational actor and abstract incentives that he needs for his thesis. So it's he just keeps citing these people who, if you understand their work, they literally undercut his main points.
Yeah, the Milgram experiment was one of those things that made me push me towards anarchism.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's a very important study, and it's been replicated a ton of times across different cultures, across different situations, across different designs. I mean, it's pretty robust. People on the internet will say, "Oh, psychology has a replication problem," and that. Or what is the recent one? They tried to say Zimbardo is bad because he told he did some shit where he told some of the prisoners that to get mean or whatever, and they say this disproves it, even though the whole point of it was that people were responding to authority. So it's just like, okay. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, I just wanted to get that out there, is that it's another example of him citing very good work that contradicts his main point and then moving on from
it. Let's see. So
the first paragraph of the fixes in the cheap and simple on just about any dimension you think of: warfare, crime, income, education, transportation, worker safety, health. The 21st century is far more hospitable to the average human than any earlier
Steven
time.
Pinker shit.
Yep. And whatever, we know that is false. I can't stress this enough. Gregory Clark in Farewell to Alms, I think it is, the book, I have to check, talks about how in many parts of the global south, people are worse off even than they were 100 years ago, let alone during pre-whatever. And as a matter of fact, he chooses the one statistic that he can win with. And I don't dispute this about childbirth. Infant mortality is substantially higher among nomadic foragers and pastoralists and stuff, but on nutrition, hours expended, safety, health, maybe not education and transportation, fine, but safety and worker safety and war and crime and violence and whatever, and nutrition and livelihood and freedom and leisure and equality and gender equality and mobility and and by the way, I don't mean all of them. I'm saying like the median and mean is higher than it was. It is the higher or the same as the best of the 21st and 20th centuries. You know what I'm saying? So anyway. And so I just hate this nonsense. Again, there's wide variation in all societies. So they're obviously incredibly violent, but that's not the point. Anyway. And this whole thing about maternal death and infant mortality is just that the solutions to that come from low cost initiatives that basically have nothing to do with the market at all. You can implement them anywhere, as shown clearly in the socialist countries among other places. But they literally just have to be like, "Hey, doctors, wash your fucking hands before you deliver a child," and then, "Oh my God, look at that! That's fall 50% or whatever." You know, it's like, it's like, wow, I never knew that. You know, it's just.
So after that, he starts talking about the law of unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So he says governments, for instance, often enact legislation meant to protect their most vulnerable charges, but that instead ends up hurting them. Which, like, as soon as I read this, I was like, oh boy, he's about to say affirmative action is bad.
Yep. But even, by the way, that principle, law of unintended consequences, moral hazard, and that paternalistic policies often actually usually do hurt the people they intend to protect. That's true, but it's true for the exact opposite reasons he says it is, and for the exact opposite things. Yeah. That's all I mean.
Yeah. So he talks about like the Endangered Species Act, which he says landowners rush to cut down trees to make it less attractive to endangered species, which means, of course, the problem is the rule against causing mass extinction and not like the profit motive.
Yeah, right.
Let's see. He says some governments have based their trash pickup fees on volume to reduce the amount of trash that gets produced, and instead people just pack their bags as full as possible or throw it in the woods. Like, wow, damn, it's almost like dealing with waste should be a social function and not something we let individuals pay for and decide whether to do or not.
Well, I mean, actually, I probably, if we're gonna be in this like urban capitalist shithole, assessing people for their waste is not a bad idea, but it is going to create perverse incentives. I mean, obviously,
Absolutely.
there's no way, there's very little way around that except for like, there are other like on the supply side, you could basically make it so that the producers of these things are liable for them being wasted or thrown out or recycled, and so they would have to, I don't know. The Economist even the Economist magazine, it's like they're just like, you just could put cheap RFID chips in trash bags and then charge rich people for throwing out their absurd shit. Literally, even the Economist, even the Economist magazine says that shit. So it's just like, what? Anyway.
Yeah, regulations on businesses never work, so we need to regulate, regular people instead. That's
right.
The favorite thing.
I love it. The Endangered Species Act is actually endangering rather than protecting species. Well, first of all, that's because it's selective about which species it protects, and which species it protects is a result of a coalition of interests fighting against each other. So it's like if the spotted owl is in danger or whatever, but I think they actually didn't end up protecting that, but like whatever. But the logging industry is like, its coalition is bigger than the environmentalist coalition. Then they're gonna get excluded, and it's also, there's this conservationism of American environmentalism, and conservationism is just kind of stupid. It doesn't make sense because it's about selectively protecting pristine nature, and that's entirely arbitrary.
Stopping evolution.
Yeah. Right. and invasive species and all that kind of thing.
Right.
But which, by the way, is not really a scientific term. But anyway,
like we only want to stop the mass killing of species that are already about to die.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And then so it's just like with the Endangered Species Act, they could just even according to his own thinking, they could just divest it of the private. Like, oh my god, I'm losing my words here. They could have instituted it such that, like, in effect, the property owner is a conservator of their property, but the property is still commonly owned by all. And you don't even need full socialization to do that. This is actually an idea that's been proposed in environmental law. It's a liberal idea, I mean, but it basically would prevent this kind of thing. But anyway.
So he continues. He starts fawning over the agricultural revolution as the end of famines, which of course was simply a few minor innovations. That's all that caused it. So he says a variety of innovations, none particularly complex. They included higher yielding crops, better tools, and a more efficient use of capital, changed farming, and subsequently the face of the earth. We talked about this like a few episodes ago, this is like a mind-bendingly bad explanation of the agricultural revolution, which was mainly because, like, he even mentions ammonium nitrate and calls it the silver single bullet, but then doesn't talk about where it came from or anything about it, which is like, it came from stealing it from the colonized peoples in the fucking New World.
But also, I mean, the whole thing about that is so overstated and misunderstood. But just before that, I wanted to say, have you noticed this thing where he talks about the Bible and the Jubilee, the debt Jubilee, and dismisses it? So all debts have to be deleted every 7 years.
Oh yeah, we just can't do that, right?
Yeah. And so he says, in the history of few match the one Ignaz Semmelweis's medical doctor. Wait, sorry. No. They would loan and then become tighter on years 5 and 6. Is that Semmelweis the statistics for that? Because otherwise, I'm going to need to know how he knows about the fucking economic practices of a biblical archaeological thing that we don't even know existed, if it existed or not. I mean, it's what? It's just like, what? Oh my God. He just said it there. He just asserted this. I mean, if there's
you see, he plugged it into an equilibrium model and found that it doesn't work.
Right.
Well, okay. So, by the way, if you want to do this, by the way, actually, it's pretty easy. And economists have all recognized this. You randomize the debt forgiveness year. It's so simple. You make it within a certain. You make it within a certain margin, so that there might be some kind of cheating. But then it basically it's like, okay, it's every 7. It's in these 7 years. It can be 7-year interval on average, but what the average, the horizon chosen for that is not publicly known. And then you just have it randomly choose days. So some years it'll come twice in a row, and then sometimes it might take 14 or whatever. But if you did that, you could not cheat the thing.
I think you should do the opposite. You should just have a debt jubilee every 30 minutes.
Right. Well, no, you should abolish debt. But I'm talking about if we're going to talk about incentive compatible capitalism, or whatever you want to do it. The problem is he says all these things, but other sociopathic economists have figured solutions out to this within these orders. You know what I mean? It's just like,
yeah.
Anyway, yes. Now to the bullshit about agriculture. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was done with that bit since we covered it so thoroughly on another episode. If you're interested in hearing that, check it out. It's called "We're Real Nerds About Bird Turds" or something like that.
Okay. Well, yeah, but just to point out though that just like all of this stuff is nonsense. The Green Revolution did not raise agricultural productivity; it raised agricultural level. Very important distinction. As we're talking about, it's colonial. Third, it degrades the soil. Fourth, it is the single biggest cause of a planetary boundary violation there is. I posted a paper where it's like, out of 9 planetary boundaries, over in land use and agriculture drives 7 or 8 of them. But and as Vladimir Smil says, and I literally have him right fucking next to me, his book. This is just one beautiful little talk about economic incentives. This is just one thing I want to read. Let's see. Since the early 1970s, energy ratios have been used to illustrate the superiority of traditional farming and the low return energies of modern agriculture. Right. But basically it says that in modern farming, the denominator is composed primarily of non-renewable fossil fuel inputs needed to power field machinery and make machines. Labor inputs are negligible. If ratios were calculated as merely quotients of edible energy to output, modern would look superior. But if the cost of producing a crop included all converted fossil fuels and energy into the common denominator, i.e. if you calculated them similarly, then the energy returns of modern agriculture would be substantially below traditional returns. Such a calculation is possible because of the physical equivalence of energies. Both food and fuels can be expressed in identical units. Anyway, so he says so some people, so first, he's basically saying superior, it says energy ratios have been used to illustrate the superiority of traditional farming and low energy returns. But then it says this can be misleading. However, if you actually do use the complete energy analysis, modern agriculture, traditional agriculture is vastly more higher returning than the modern. Anyway, it's just this book, Energy and Civilization and History by Vaclav Smil. I basically think anybody who's interested in these ecological issues and transition should have to read this, because unlike these other dipshit economists, he actually looks at these long. He basically does huge historical, deep historical analysis of energy and its conversion and its mobilization in labor and food and consumption and waste and the system based around it and the transitions. And it's interesting because, like, unlike other sorts of things, energy is in a sense a homogeneous factor input, in as much as it can be converted either into whatever denominator you want, like power, energy released, food, labor equivalent, so on, and making these systemic comparisons really possible. And, you know, I don't know, as long as you distinguish between the stocks and the flows of energy, you know, sunlight flowing down versus sunlight being stocked up in the form of fossil fuels, like, it's just a great book. Anyway, and economists are stupid, but
so speaking of economists being stupid, he then talks about whale oil and how it nearly drove whales to extinction. But again, no reflection on how this clearly shows that business is awful and causes untold destruction in the pursuit of personal enrichment. And of course, he says that crude oil, which replaced whale oil, was the original Endangered Species Act, with like no hint of irony to it.
I know that's like this.
Especially because he talks about climate change later in the book. Like, what the fuck, man? He's just like a complete dog brain. Like he thinks in like 1 minute intervals. He can't think about anything before or after it.
What because he takes everything as an inevitability and then sees things that occur as having been inevitable to replace them. That's sort of how he thinks. So
he's like the Nate Silver of economics.
Nate Silver is smarter than this.
Yeah. Yes.
Indisputably.
Hot take.
Even Nate Silver, I've read some of his things, will admit that every once in a while he'll have to admit that the statistics prove that some sort of one of these aspects of like modernity or technocracy are full of shit. So every once in a while he'll admit that. And I don't think Nate Silver even has this abstract and useless conception of incentives. So if you're doing worse than the fucking baseball Donald Trump is gonna lose guy, then come on. By the way, also Vaclav Smil does talk about the transition with the whale oil and the other stuff too. Actually, I have actually quite a few books on that one. It's a really by the way, to another point, Andreas Malm, wonderful book, Fossil Capital. Every single fucking person in the world should read it, or every leftist anyway. And it talks about how the energy returned on energy invested, as well as like the economic cost of introduction of petroleum fuels and those kinds of things, was not actually better than the equivalents that they could get from air and water at the time, because water and air and water power and other sorts of similar powers, to the extent they could capture wind through windmill and sun through whatever else, although that was much harder, water was still frequent and abundant. So he shows how the water mills, they were more efficient than the fossil, than the
they didn't get replaced until like 1980 or something.
Well, they were still economically profitable for a long time because that's marginal, but it took 100 years of basically subsidized fossil fuel use and using it at a loss by business owners for it to finally become more efficient. And so the thing about this is absurd, because the notion is like,
and efficiency being like cost efficiency, right?
Cost efficiency and energy efficiency. So EROEI and
that's
basically
for anyone who doesn't know, that's energy returned on energy invested. It's like a measure of how much energy you have to put in to get energy out of something else.
The problem is, the thing is that like capitalists taking a loss, I mean the state contributed, but capitalists taking a loss collectively goes, even especially if they're not cartelized, they're sort of competing against each other. That goes against basically all these economic theories, because they what they cared about, except for, by the way, incident Bicklers, which is where I was going to actually go next. I just point this out, but which is that because fossil fuels were more advantageous because it gave them not more money, but more control. Because now they could put factories wherever they wanted, whereas water mills had to be next to water. And because land rights still, despite enclosure, had at least somewhat favored the peasants' tenancy and stuff. So the workers who lived in the area of water mills, A, had bargaining power because it's more costly to move the factory, and B, had better access to the proceeds and the rights. With the introduction of fossil fuels, now the factory owners could put them wherever they want and could destroy any labor power. And by the way, the same thing is true. This book called there's two. One is called Carbon Democracy, and one's called Energy and Empire. Actually, there's two books called Energy and Empire. But anyway, Coal and Empire. Well, whatever. And it shows that same thing happened with coal. That the U.S. government and British governments, they subsidized these massive postal and naval shipping techniques and building at a loss for a substantial portion of time, because even though it cost more, it enabled all these other things. And coal especially gave the British Army naval mobility and supremacy. So that's helped initiate, or was part and parcel of, this mad late 1800s imperialist rush for resource spots where they could basically refuel their ships with coal. I mean, it's just literally, so yeah. Anyway.
I think I remember even in The Conquest of Bread, Kropotkin talks about how postal systems came from the military.
That might be true, because also telegraphy, but where you would have different people
telegraphy?
Telegraphy, but people would be on different towers, and you shine a light and it would communicate across vast distances. And in Mulan, where they light the fire and the whole wall goes up, and that it was actually incredibly efficient, but and over long distances, literally they could communicate. The French army could communicate stuff across the country relatively quickly. But anyway, I'll send the links to these stuff, because these resources, I love them, because they basically destroy, both the vulgar neoclassical and the vulgar Marxian analysis. Not the more sophisticated ones. Malm himself is a Marxist, so it's not like a rejection of it, but it does disprove this idea that A, technology drives society as opposed to it being a dialectic, and B, that profit rather than control is the main motivator. So I don't know. Yeah. Anyway.
All right. So the next part of this chapter gets into something that has become kind of a pet peeve of mine, which is car safety.
Yeah.
He talks about how cars are so much safer than they were in 1950, when they also killed 40,000 people every year. Thanks to the seatbelt made in cars by the famous warplane man, driving in the United States isn't much more dangerous than sitting on your couch. So, I mean, I would be interested to hear how 40,000 people die every year from sitting on their couch. But,
no. The logic is that I know exactly. I know how he can justify that if he wants to. It's absurd, but he can do it.
Is it
sitting on your couch,
being sedentary?
Yes, it's the foregone cost of exercise and activity, and that you could have been making money, and you could have been doing stuff, but instead you're wasting your time and eating and relaxing. So it takes time off.
Right.
It's the existence of couches and the use of couches that kills you, not that.
And then I'm sure a non-trivial portion of perhaps elderly people fall off their couches or something. Fine, we can grant that, but that, it's an absurd comparison.
Yeah. And then he let's see. Sorry.
Wait, which chapter is the car thing in?
It's the fix is in, and it's cheap and simple.
It's still there.
He's talking about how seatbelts made cars really safe, much safer, and it's just a piece of cloth, so it's really cheap, and it was great because, it's this cheap and simple fix that lowered the death rates of cars. But of course, questioning whether cars are a good idea in the first place, not part of this book at all.
there's this really funny debate you can see on YouTube where this kid, Milton Friedman is being questions Q&A, and this kid stands up and he talks like a total dunce, and he's like, recently it was announced that GE, at the expense of the consumer, insulted a sub-faulty radiator exhausting has led to subsequent deaths on the road and da-da-da. And not by virtue of him being right, but by this kid being very dopey and but because this kid, so Milton Friedman's just like, so you think that life has an infinite value? What if the investment in the cost savings from the tailpipe, whatever, were used to make life-saving medicines? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, but there's this. But what's funny is
you can only have trains or doctors. You can't have both.
Right, exactly. But I forget who it is. But the kid who asked my question, unironically, grew up and it turns out I forget which one it was, but it was one of these pundits, like Michael Horowitz or one of those NY Times conservative guys. I forget who it is, but there's this. It literally, he's the kid, the hippie kid. Is a famous conservative pundit now. I'll find it, but yeah.
So one really fucking crazy part in this chapter, like Levitt, I guess hadn't said anything really racist in like 20 pages, so he says
he needed
in
he was like
in
that
a parentheses
with the guy with the swollen vein, where it's like when you
he says parenthetically in this chapter. You might argue that for a 40-year-old safety device that only 20% of its users can install correctly may not be a great safety device to begin with. He's compared with car seats. Sorry. Oh, to begin with, yeah. Compared with car seats, the condoms worn by Indian men seem practically infallible.
What?
What? What the fuck? What?
God damn it, Levitt.
Is that the condom size thing?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
I think in the illustration section in the middle of the book, there's like a picture of it.
Well, I did not see that. I didn't see an illustration section in the one that I had.
How do Indian men measure up with a picture? Yep, I'll send it to you.
God.
You should post this on the thing. Like this is illustrative of the whole book.
Like the rest of the chapter, he does like a parallel comparison of like seatbelts versus car seats, because he's trying to prove that like this simple fix is better for whatever fucking reason. So he does
Which might be true, but it's irrelevant to his point.
Yeah. So he tries to go to like crash test facilities and have them test like using a seatbelt on a child instead of a car seat, and like all of them turn him down except for one who would only do it secretly, because they might lose business from car companies. And, like, again, this guy thinks that capitalism is fine, and no analysis of this, you know?
But, and that's talk about incentive incompatibility. If the car companies have to hire their own regulators, that's what they're going to do, like with the fucking banks and the insurance bundling during the 2007 financial crisis. Because the banks pay the people who certify and regulate them, and if they say the wrong thing, then they don't get their business. It's so it's that's an incentive for you, fucking Stephen Levitt.
I mean,
you don't put a fox in charge of the hen house, as it is said.
Right, exactly.
So I was really mad reading this when I was writing these notes. So I went and looked up like statistics about train deaths. So in the EU, which has about twice the population of the US, they only have 1,000 fatalities a year from trains, and 70% of those are suicides. So it's like an extremely safe form of transportation.
To be fair, the comparison you have to make is by volume, though, but absolutely the volume is higher. So,
well, even in the US, for trains, 0.43 fatalities per billion passenger miles, compared with cars, which are 7.28 fatalities per billion passenger miles. So you're 17 times more likely to die in a car than on a train.
Yeah, almost 20 times. That's absurd.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and also, like, I bet you, but that doesn't even, like, because that doesn't even account for the secondary or indirect causes as well. So so the accidents, presumably both of these include people who are hit by cars and hit by trains, and then those who are on them as well. Right? Is that how the fatalities per billion miles is traveled is calculated? I don't know, but I
think it's all just fatalities involved with train
in general.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So
they're counting suicides. So.
Okay. And so then, I mean, let's see. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Okay. Cars are safer than than sitting on the couch, by the way. All right. Here's a great example. However, cars cause and enable as much sedentary whatever as the sitting on the couch, right? Whereas the trains don't necessarily do so. So in fact, you can attribute the sitting on the couch deaths to cars, and then trains win doubly. You see what I'm saying? The indirect effects of both of them are absurd. And like cars pollute and destroy the environment and breathable air at a much higher rate. And roads destroy ecosystems. Road mileage are heat traps. And by the way, traffic hours lost due to congestion stuff. That also has a foregone cost in life because, for example, ambulances or lost hours worked or the stress from driving or, I mean, there's so many other losses in health, like physical, mental health, time, congestion, pollution, damage.
The suburb form of like urban planning, which is only possible because of cars, like causes people to become more obese and have worse health problems because they drive everywhere and don't exercise. And it also increases car fatalities because people drive faster on those kind of roads than they do in the city. So they're like more likely to kill pedestrians.
And they also pay less in tolls and parking costs. So there's induced demand as well.
Yeah.
And the sprawl leads to higher costs for the city. It makes it takes longer time for emergency services to get to a place. This is all proven, by the way. I mean, it's just like whatever. There's a direct correlation between density and CO2 emissions, eyes on the street, all this other stuff. And there's also the way that the suburbs and this car culture are impoverishing in a key way. And I mean, there's just so many talking about foregone costs from pollution to whatever. It's just absurd.
So here is like the real crux of this chapter, and like one of the only discussions of the economy really in many pages. He says, alas, governments aren't famous for cheap or simple solutions. They tend to prefer the costly and cumbersome route. Note that none of the earlier examples in this chapter were the brainchild of a government official, except one of the guys that made warplanes or whatever. Even the polio vaccine was primarily developed by a private group, the National Foundation for Infant Paralysis. President Roosevelt personally provided the seed money. It's interesting that even a sitting president chose the private sector for such a task, and the foundation then raised the money and conducted the trials. So he says cheap and simple governments aren't famous for cheap and simple solutions like the private sector are. Is like cheap and simple solutions, like each person having their own personal vehicle that they then have to drive around themselves, and it kills people 40,000 times a year. And he says, nor was it the government that put seatbelts in cars. He just fucking said that no one used them until the government forced them to. What the fuck?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. They did not do so. Yeah, and consumer lawsuits driven by Ralph Nader, really, actually, of all people, which is really funny. But
oh my God.
He's surprisingly interesting in that way. But also, and just like the polio vaccine is such a funny example too, because it was just like, I mean, they put it into the public domain afterwards. And among other things, what he neglects to mention is, oh wait, who provides 90% of healthcare R&D funding? You know what I mean? It's like between just basically the private places do not fund R&D ever.
Right.
And they never have. It took the government for doing it and passing it off to them. It's a giant, scam, basically.
Yeah.
So let's try and finish out with the last chapter.
By the way, and that's like not a defense of the state either. It's just like a silly. It's just such an absurdly.
Right.
I don't know.
So the last chapter is the one that I think everyone probably remembers, and it's so much worse than you thought. It's the one about climate change. So he starts the chapter by talking about global cooling and how that should cast doubt on the veracity of claims of global warming.
Even though there was this one article about it in Time magazine in 1972, and then no one ever talked about it again. That was the extent of it.
And everyone who thinks global warming is real worships Al Gore, and
conservatives love that. They're like, oh, and how about Al Gore's private plane? I don't give a shit. Throw him in the gallows too, man. I don't fucking
right.
So I'm just gonna go through some of the highlights of just like really stupid shit he says here. So first up, you could also switch from eating beef to eating kangaroo because kangaroo farts, as fate would have it, doesn't contain methane. Awesome, dude. Let's see. If we were certain that warming would impose large and defined costs, the economics of the problem would come down to a simple cost-benefit analysis. Do the future benefits from cutting emissions outweigh the costs of doing so? Or are we better off waiting to cut emissions later? Or even, perhaps, polluting at will and just learning to live in a hotter world?
Oh my fucking god!
Oh yeah, man!
Fuck up! I will fucking personally kill you. Jesus Christ!
This one's great. It is understandable, therefore, that the movement to stop global warming has taken on the feel of a religion. The core belief is that humankind inherited a pristine Eden, has sinned greatly by polluting it, and must now suffer lest we all perish in a fiery apocalypse. James Lovelock, who might be considered a high priest of this religion, writes in a confessional...
another fucking sort that said one thing one time in 1975 that they...
writes in a confessional language that would feel at home in any liturgy. We misused energy and overpopulated the earth. It is much too late for sustainable development. What we need is a sustainable retreat. Well, how is that religious language?
And also, doesn't Levitt at some point advocate population control?
I'm sure he does.
So that's what they say. Like the left wing Malthusian degrowth, whatever. When they want population control, and then another
thing that we're always talking about.
And in other contexts, they'll be like, we recently put $1 trillion into a program to sterilize the entire population of that. And it's the same people, and
So I didn't finish this quote. So he says a sustainable retreat sounds a bit like wearing a sackcloth. To citizens of the developed world in particular, this would mean consuming less, using less, driving less, and though it's uncouth to say it aloud, learning to live with a gradual depopulation of the earth.
This guy is such a fucking it's just a shill. That's it. That's all.
If the modern conservation movement has a patron saint, it is surely Al Gore.
Oh yeah.
And bam. By the way, listen to the slip he just made. Listen to what he did. He switched from environmental movement to conservation movement.
Yeah.
These aren't the same thing.
Right.
By the way, and both that's that's not even but not even pedantically, they're not the same thing. Conservatives support conservation efforts all the time, but it's like because conservation episodes have to do with land rights basically, and farming, and the maintenance of resources and stuff, and having pretty backyards, you know what I mean? Whereas the environmental movement is not about that.
So we have a very interesting cameo here. So he's talking about critics of the climate hoax, and so he says any religion, meanwhile, has its heretics, and global warming is no exception. Boris Johnson, a classically educated journalist who managed to become mayor of London, has read Lovelock. He calls him a sacerdotal figure and concluded the following. Very interesting citation.
I mean, I love, and you know who that young journalist was? And the president, the prime minister of the United Kingdom.
Classically educated, which means
classically educated into having the same blabbermouth right-wing brain worms as Donald Trump, where even when he's trying to like be witty and like whatever, he's like malapropisms and like kitschy form of racism literally just sounds like he's just like throwing up after I don't like chunks of beef. He said, it's just oh god.
So here's another stupid guy history. Back when the world's biggest cities were choked with horse manure, people didn't switch to the car because it was good for society. They switched because it was in their economic interest to do so. Which,
oh my god!
I mean, there's like a long history of cars basically being like forced onto society, and that's how how people switch to them. But okay.
And also, by the way, as though horses were the only other form of transportation aside from at the time, bruh. LA people didn't get around in horses; they got around in the fucking streetcar, and they did just fine. I mean, they got around with horses in the ranch areas and stuff. But I mean, come on, right? They still do. I mean, but and now who has? I mean, whatever. The options were never horses or cars, right? That's like such an absurd thing.
Mm-hmm.
What about bikes? What about walking?
Yeah.
What about trains? What about streetcars? What about
Yep.
It's just oh my god. No, we should use global warming as a good actually, because then we can flood all the coastal cities and use a canal system, which is far more efficient than the cars. See, there's my inner economist. Dude.
Bad idea.
I actually did see a speculative climate architectural proposal where it was just basically looked like I forgot who did it, but it was like a team. You know, every team was like architects, ecologists, and whatever, and their thing was like, look, let's just fill the bottom of all buildings in New York City with concrete of the first few floors so they don't deteriorate. And build a canal and drainage system and call it a day.
Oh yeah.
Because he's like, the assumption is like we're clearly not going to do it. We don't want this to happen, but look, we're going to have to live somehow, so you might as well. Because it's like basically elites would consent to doing that more than they would to stop it. You know what I mean? So,
and everybody loves Venice.
Who doesn't? Yeah. Brought us great. I mean, what brought us great modern culture? You know what? No, it's Italian though.
So he talks about this guy Mirvold. I can't remember his first name, but I love this quote. Mirvold, who is 50 years old, has been smart for a long time. He is so polymathic as to make an everyday polymath tremble with shame. In addition to his scientific interests, he is an accomplished nature photographer, chef, mountain climber, and a collector of rare books, rocket engines, antique instruments, and especially dinosaur bones. So, like, he's a rich guy who cooks and takes pictures.
Yeah, this is literally the same fucking resume as the average, like, hipster millennial, but, like, with money
I'm a nature
attached.
photographer. I take my dog on a walk, and then I take pictures while I'm out there.
Yeah.
Wait, I love this, Mirvold. And so he was Mirvold, he was the former CTO of Microsoft, so...
Oh. Right.
And
that's what he's saying, Nathan Mirvold?
This book, he was working at Intellectual Ventures, which he cites a bunch of times, which is like the biggest patent troll in the country. But they did some stuff about geoengineering, so he's like talking about them fawningly.
And then listen to this before he says, there's been some grumbling that is a patent troll, accumulating patents so it can extort money. There's little hard evidence for such claims. Literally, even everybody, like even the fucking industries themselves admit it's real because it got so bad that the patent trolls themselves are being trolled. So it's just like, oh my god,
like they're objectively not this thing that is a category.
Right.
It's my favorite argument.
This is how everybody makes it. It's like they'll be like, what you just said is analogical to something someone else said, and this other person is wrong, therefore you're wrong.
Right? Yeah.
People make that argument all the time, and I think it is one of the most blood-curdlingly annoying arguments there is.
Yep.
Because it doesn't even make sense. It's just
Yeah.
So before talking
Yeah.
about geoengineering, Levitt goes through just about every climate change denial talking point imaginable. CO2 levels used to be higher. Humans cause only 2% of emissions. Climate models are not good enough to make predictions. More CO2 is good for plants. Global warming actually causes higher CO2 levels and not the other way around. Warming is actually because we're so good at taking care of the environment. Sea level rise is less than the change in tides. Global temperature has actually decreased recently, etc., etc., etc. Like, literally, if you go to, what is it, Skeptical Science, that website that has, like, climate change denier arguments, it's just, like, everything on that website.
Well, what is it? So a couple of those things he said were like true, but incredibly misleading.
Yeah, exactly.
So so climate change causes CO2, but doesn't. It's both.
Right.
It's a self-propelling system. That's the point.
Right.
Or humans only cause 2% of all emissions. Yeah, but it's the variance that makes the difference.
Yeah, exactly. It's a stock flow thing, and if you upset the equilibrium quickly enough, it doesn't matter how how small it is.
Mr. Economist who thinks equilibrium is governs the economy, like not understanding how equilibrium works.
Yeah, I mean, understanding because he just assumes everything just does restore to equilibrium, whereas this is talking about an instance which, by definition, it's occurring too fast for the system to return to equilibrate to it. So it's like I don't know what they do model these things in economics, like exogenous shocks, as they call it.
Yeah.
Like, and they have a whole literature on this, right? And it's not necessarily the case. Like, even in the pro market ones, there'll be like, there'll be like something asteroid strikes, or no, crop failure is a big one they do, a mass crop failure or something. Yeah.
And that's why we have futures. That's the reason.
Exactly. That's why we have insurance markets, futures, globalization, and warehouses. And as long as the markets are complete, then we'll beat the famine. It's just like, well, actually, asshole, if you read, you fucking piece of shit, if you read Mike Davis's late Victorian Holocaust, they did have all those things, and it caused fucking several millions of people to die. It's just,
I have that book on my shelf. I need to read it sometime.
It's good. It's a good book. I mean, it's really sad.
I'm sure, yeah. That's why I haven't read it yet. I'm like, I'm already depressed right now.
Facing yourself, yeah.
Well, see, okay, this thing where conservatives will be like, it's the free market, and then once people start doing something in the free market they don't like, they ban it. So it's with with Israel BDS, right? It's like, how can you ban someone from not buying something? Anyway. So in Mike Davis's book, he talks about the government was like, well, no, it's the free market. So then private charity has to take care of it. So then these people organize these mass charity campaigns from England, a few of them, the few aristocrats who didn't just think that they should just kill everybody. They and the government banned it, and they said, no, giving them donations is voluntarily is still disrupting the free market, so you can't do it. And then all these people were like, okay, so then they did another free market solution. Like, let's like create this kind of system where we dump the flow from one place to another and all this other stuff. And they're like, no, that doesn't help the free market. In fact, what if we cartelize all the production? And then it's just, so every single time, like, they even eked a small gain in the market, the British government would institute another rule that they said was for the free market, because just to fucking torture these people, basically, to kill them. I mean, that's literally to get as much revenues. And then the Queen of England, or what, I forget if it was king or queen, but they said, India is taking so much from us right now. They need to pay their share. There's some quote like that. It's like one of those things that makes you want to become an ML, because you just want to like blood. You want to just like destroy these people. But it's just, anyway.
Like, can I become an ML for like a year, do this thing, and then like come back to being an anarchist, or is that?
it's like a ritual where you go out into the wilderness, you pay your name, and then you come back, and then you get integrated into society.
You either die in ML or live long enough to become an anarchist.
That's what they say. That's what they say in reverse. They say, you either become an ML or. Oh no! Other way. You
die
either
an anarchist or live long enough
die
to become
an ML. Yeah. Die an anarchist, live long enough to be an ML. Yeah. That's what they say.
Well, it's like I like to say, anybody who's who's not an anarchist when they're 20 has no heart, and anybody who's not an ML when they're like 50 has no brain, right? Isn't that how that saying goes?
Yeah.
Entirely.
But anybody who's not an anarchist when they're 20 doesn't have a heart. Anybody who's not an anarchist when they're 60 also doesn't have a brain. That's my view.
Well, Young Neocon, once you get a little older and you get your own house and you read On Authority, you'll become an ML too. Just wait.
Literally, just like it's so funny. Like oh yeah, you're an anarchist, but you steam water. That's a state change. Like
wah, wah.
You read books. That's by an author. That's authority. That's literally what he argues. Basically,
you say you're against hierarchy, yet you believe in Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but you climb stairs, but you stack object, right?
As actually, I got this is an argument that I got into with a well-meaning, liberal friend of mine, as many of us have, of course. Who went to the same grad school as I did, but apparently did not.
Way to humble brag about having friends, but no.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot. That's not really a very good thing to be passing around. So I was explaining to him literally the 101, the basics of anarchism, just being against unjustified hierarchies and stuff like that, and how it's all about liberatory, sort of stuff. And he said, okay, but wait a minute, how, this classic shit when you just believe inherently in a state or some kind of other apparatus, the legitimacy of this state and all this shit. And he was like, how do you do the cops? Civil rights? And I was like, oh my fucking God. Yeah, right. He was like, well, what about what if you let the South become anarchist as well, and then all the white people try to kill all the black people or something like that, right? Just in very simple terms is what he was saying. I was like, well, oh God, where do I start with this shit? But then I was like, well, basically, I mean,
that already happened.
People who are being oppressed. Yeah, exactly. I was like, how do you argue that's not already happening? But I was like, the people who are being oppressed, if they still need help, we can help them. Then we just.
Their mentality is of that we're playing a role-playing game, and so the way they talk about it is that we're gonna snap our fingers and then we're going to be in anarchism, and then everything else will be right. And so it's the same thing. It's okay, with all my critiques of, I have very savage critiques of primitivism. It's teleology. It's absurd nature culture vision. It's misunderstanding of what technology is. It's techno-determinism with regard to agriculture, even though there's critiques. It's the fact that it believes in the idea of an aestheticized, pristine wilderness. Its fall narrative. It's glorification of poverty and peasantry. Its misuse of anthropology and biology, and its association in some forms with Malthusianism and transmisogyny and other things. Not all of them, but some corners. And then its normative view of the body and so on. Okay, so I have all these critiques, right?
Right.
But where am I going with this? Sorry. Oh my God, sorry. What was it?
Role-playing game.
Oh, yes. Okay, thank you. So God, thank you. Because I read this critique by what's his face on some. He wrote something about it, and he was talking about how anarcho-primitivism is ableist and anti-classist and whatever, and against poor and marginalized peoples, and because those resources wouldn't exist for them in the anarchist primitivist world or whatever. But the premise of that, whatever else you want to say, is that assumes that we're going to snap our fingers and then tomorrow have a collapse and there won't be technology and stuff anymore.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that that's just not true. Anything that would, first of all, either anarcho-primitivism would, if it were a thing, there would just be a collapse, but no one would have any control over that, so therefore it wouldn't even be ideological. But then the other option is let's say it was a transition to it or whatever, then that means that there would be this massive period during which all these things structurally change. So then what? As the person themselves knows, disability is always relative to a culture. A substantial number of things that we call disabilities or neurodivergent in modern industrial society are not that in whatever. And of course, the real radical point is that there never should be any of those. But the fact of the matter is that this understanding of it is this snap your fingers mentality. And just nothing works that way. We're not making D&D characters filling out our stats and then fucking then the DM comes in and says, okay, now we're doing anarcho-primitivism. Roll your character. Yeah, I take 5 points in. Yeah, it's just like anyway.
5 points in sea level.
Yeah.
So
right.
So speaking of snapping your fingers and fixing everything magically, right after Levitt criticizes climate models for not being accurate, he tries to make the case that we should be convinced to try spraying sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere because a guy from the patent troll company proves that it would work with a climate model. Like literally, he used the same model that he just said is not accurate enough to say that global warming is real, and then he says, "Oh, but because of that model, this guy modeling it with sulfur dioxide, we should definitely do that."
Well, and so it's I sent a link earlier in this to this the first chapter of a book called Climate Shock, which is by an economist and this environmentalist, and it's similar. I mean, similar kind of thinking or whatever, but it's almost like if this guy if they weren't sociopaths and actually were smart and cared about the environment, but they're anti geoengineering basically. And they talk about this mentality right here, and they say that this is going to become more common because of the fact that the coalition to stop climate change and fossil fuel and stuff and so on is diffuse, while the powers that benefit from it are concentrated, and the powers that benefit from it are also going to eventually feel its effects, but then they're going to go for a cheap unilateral solution. What's the only cheap unilateral solution? Geoengineering. Again, because the diffuse coalition can't resist it. And so they talk about how this, like, as these costs worsen, because of the way this incentive structure is, that the probability that geoengineering is just going to happen because, I don't know, some corporation or some whatever just does it. Like, even with that, it increases with the increases with the year. And it's just like Levitt doesn't realize that he's saying something similar, but like not realizing, as you're saying, that, it's contradicting the model he's using. But anyway. It's just these people don't even
These people don't even is a good way to put it. Yeah.
I don't know. Even the geoengineering, the scientists, not the insurance company people or the business school people or the techno utopians, the actual scientists who talk about geoengineering. First of all, many of them, even the ones who literally believe in geoengineering, say that there should be a moratorium on practical research into it until it is totally and fundamentally pre-regulated in a strong manner. That's a common argument for it. The second one is that all of them basically say, look, geoengineering is not a long-term solution. It is a bridge to save us from dying, so that we can go to solutions that don't require.
Yeah, I think the sulfur dioxide thing, you have to continuously spray it into the atmosphere, and as soon as you stop, it actually overshoots and gets a little bit worse.
Exactly. It's even worse because these things are self-perpetuating because by their own chemical compositions and physical effects, they require continued whatever. What if 1 year there's an economic crisis or some sort of other kind of thing, and we just lose 1 year in our ability to regulate it, and then it's over, right? So it's just it's the same logic, by the way, that the sort of pro-nuclear people ignore, which is not like that. Because we all know nuclear energy is safer than other like fossil fuels and whatever. Like that's and radiation and meltdown risk is very low. Like yes, fine. Like literally, no one's denied that for 30 years. Not even environmentalists. So it's just like whatever. But that's not the point. But the situation they are proposing, where it would provide 100% of our energy and the sheer number of plants that would provide, that's a different situation and kind of risk and regulation than what we're talking now, because even though the relative rate would be low, if you do the math, look and even assume it's the same or lower rate, the absolute rate it will start being high at that point. This is not my biggest critique of it. It's just one of them. And the point is that at scale, if it were providing everything, then it needs to have a continuous perpetual regulatory apparatus that needs to be working 24/7, 365 for basically till the end of the human species, because a single correlated accident, however rare, would cascade across the entire system in a very, very destructive way. So this is all, by the way, including with it because they don't ever talk about scale and scope. And the problem with geoengineering is its scale and scope. Small scale geoengineering like biochar or sea fertilization is fine sometimes. And carbon capture, I mean, biochar is the most promising of those, but they don't scale. So it's just like this thing of like not understanding the fallacy of composition, as it were, which is that at different scales, there's different risks and compounds. And I don't really want to get into the whole nuclear thing because anyway, my main critiques of it are economic and social and organizational and resource based and political, but not the hippie scare ones and I don't know whatever. But anyway, it's the same principle as with geoengineering. Yeah. Okay, great thing about economists. Here it is, great thing. They do not distinguish between like, how do I put? Okay, in the same thing within economics, where what they do is they assume that your institutional and technological and metrical and political and world system is given, and then your only preferences are choices within that. You don't have meta preferences about what that system should be in the first place.
Right.
Because if you did that, by the way, the models would become indeterminate.
Yes. Reasons I got bad grades in grad school.
Well, not always, but because if you have preferences over the means by which you adjudicate preferences, it's always going to be a path-dependent outcome, or just not resolved. But I mean, that doesn't stop the market design people. Anyway, but there's the same kind of thing because the cost benefit analysis of something irreversible or conditional for everything else is different than the cost benefit analysis of a pure loss. So it's just like in some sociopathic sense, like you can think about like, oh, the money from the resources produced by this factory save more lives than the pollution from it kills. And like that is like, I mean, horrible logic, but it's like consistent. Yeah. Like it makes sense. You're comparing like units, right? So it's whatever. But if the choice is between the output from this factory is eventually going to undercut the possibility of there being factories or something, that's a very different kind of risk. So it's just like with climate change, it doesn't even matter what the risk is that there won't be any more risks ever again because we'll all be dead or everything else will be destroyed.
Even the attempts to like put a price on how much it would cost to fix climate change, like it makes no sense because the only thing that has a price like ultimately is paying people to do stuff or paying for resources that were made by people being paid to do stuff. And the only way that works with climate change is paying people to fix the effects of climate change, which it's not clear that that's possible at all.
Well, I mean, so with the social cost of carbon thing, the way that works is that the way they assign the values depending on it is based on they don't define it purely based on current and cost to other people, although they do figure that in. So they'll be like, okay, X sea level rise will cause X thing, right? And then subject to a discount rate. But in the defense of some of these
expected
models,
lost in economic activity, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But in defense of some of these climate models, the other way they think about it is what is the price that usage of this stuff will occur substantially low enough that we will not hit X threshold where runaway stuff will happen. So that is kind of it. Some of them do price the very fact of uncertainty and irreversibility into it to their defense. The point is though that there is no such price in effect. What you are actually you're not even really what you're not pricing. You're basically like you're trying to, it's like you're not pricing the future. You're pricing the rate at which you want something to occur. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So whatever. By the way, they used to say $40 a pound, and the conservative estimate, the left-wing estimate was like 120. No, the right conservative 20, median estimate across was 40, and then the left-wingers 80 to 20. I mean, now that's already moved up, so 40 and then 80 and then you know what I mean? So the estimate that they used to say was the crazy liberalism one, leftism one, is now closer to the average. But anyway,
so
that was 10 years ago.
Just to wrap it up, Levitt, he cites, I don't remember who it was. It doesn't even matter. But what's interesting, what's funny to me about this is he says that this guy who supports geoengineering as a solution has deep environmentalist bona fides, which he considers winning a trophy for best homework on the ozone layer. Whereas I think most environmentalists would consider deep bona fides to be like going to jail. But
or at least like being a soil restorative farmer.
Yeah,
or something.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
So anyway, I think we've covered the book enough. Very bad, not good at all. Levitt is a dumb guy and shows how dumb economics is in general.
Well, I think it would be cool if we could do an episode like where about sort of, because I always go off topic anyway. Sorry about that, but just where we could kind of do, because a lot. I mean, I'm interested in a lot of the same things you are, and so it's like my others do whatever, all my little Twitter tricks or whatever. But the point is that like all these things, like the agricultural stuff and the technology stuff and the car stuff and the economics critique and the capitalist power and the state and all this other stuff and all these things all really do tie together in a very nice way. So I think first of all, I don't know. Just whatever. If we can ever get our podcast back on the run or whatever, first of all, we should do a joint episode. Yeah. But secondly, because I think it's kind of funny because we're actually both these dudes come from very different schools, but I'm the centrist who's between. But anyway, I just think that this like a general explication of like how okay, oh my god, almost like if Freakonomics, but if you were left wing and not stupid, so it's like because the same things just keep coming up in all these different places, like the misspecification of the incentives, the ignoring the state, the differential, the categorical unfair comparisons, the dismissal of certain kinds of evidence while weighting other kinds, the self-inconsistent premises, the total ignorance of power, the total ignorance of different kinds of measures of cost and output, the total sort of misunderstanding of like ecology and technology and the state and energy and institutions. And it's just like, it's because it's so thorough. Like the ideology and its effects is so thorough and unifies so many things. The way that it just, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
Like Stephen Levitt manages to be wrong on every single important topic and very loud about it. And but in that way, he actually is kind of like the voice of a certain population.
Oh yeah, for
because,
sure.
Like this is how like both boomers and then like the kids who parted their blonde hair and wore the kids who looked like Draco Malfoy and wore suits.
The blue suits with the gold buttons on the sleeves.
Yeah, and it would carry a rolling
backpack,
backpack, and then we're like, I'm part of the Young Republicans Yacht Clubbing Society of America. Like those kids, and those fucks run the world. So anyway.
Well, if you enjoyed this episode, check out our other episodes at neighborsciencepodcast.com. Give us a rating on iTunes. 5 stars only, please. If you're going to give us 4 stars or less, fuck out of here.
Listen, you call yourself an anarchist, yet you are telling people what to do.
Our Twitter account is at NeighborSciPod. I'm at Handle of Rye. Chris is at Solidarity_Goth. Young Neocon is at Young Neocon. Let's see. We have a Patreon and we have a Teespring. We just gave away a shirt for our 420th follower on Twitter. So that listener will be getting the shirt in early October because it takes a while to print. All right, thanks. Bye.
Now I actually do have to go play D&D.
Nice.
And be exactly what I just made fun of. Anyway, talk to you later.